Well, hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. This time round, I will unashamedly say I am covering one of my favourite cars. And it's funny because cars tend to come in phases. We'll go through an Aston Martin phase, a Lamborghini phase, a Porsche phase even. But right now, it's a Ferrari, Daytona and Dino phase. And we've got two Daytonas here at the moment. This particular car is in for appraisal. It's in for a good look over, and then we decide what the customer is going to do with it or not do with it. The car has had a period of inactivity, which is not unusual, to say the least. And we've already started by this. We've managed to free off the brakes, but they actually need a bit more than that, really, if it's brakes. The dust caps on the pistons are starting to flake away and things like that. So it needs a bit more TLC than just freeing things off. But it's good enough. It's fit for purpose. They're free. They're working properly. We can road test the car later. I'll go into more detail about how we assess a car in a future video, but I can touch on it in this one. We check obviously brakes, steering, suspension. We go into that very deeply, both from a general point of view, like a roadworthiness test, if you will, but also applying knowledge and experience built up over the last 40 years. And that's just me. We've got the other guys here. Marcus has done the appraisal on this, Les, Pete. You know, these are all guys with a massive amount of experience, and they're bringing on the youngsters, Craig, Corey, Alex, etc. And it's a wonderful thing to be part of this, see all this happening around me, really. But anyway, I digress. Marcus has done the appraisal on this. There's a great long list of things. We note every last tiny detail, but overall, this is a good car, a very good car. And it's one of the interesting things is we do a cylinder leak down test, as it's called, whenever we're asked to do an appraisal such as this. And the cylinder leak down test is one of the most revealing things about the condition of an engine. It's not a compression test where the engine is spinning and it pushes the needle up on a compression gauge. What we actually do is set every one of the 12 cylinders at top dead center. So the piston is at the top of the bore and both valves are closed, the inlet and exhaust valves. And we take the spark plug out, put an air line in there, and we introduce 100 pounds per square inch of pressure, and we take a reading of how much of the pressure is lost either through the intake valve, the exhaust valve, or the piston rings. And that can sometimes be very revealing. If it's going past the piston rings into the crankcase of the engine, we can take the oil filler cap off and actually hear it going, actually hear it leaking past the piston rings, which is not great. That means they're worn. But this has got a fantastic set of leak down readings. Marcus and I were astounded with this. I think the worst one was 96% out of 100, which means 4% loss, which is negligible, really. That is the sign of an engine in rude health. So the owner will be delighted about that. This particular car has got a very interesting history. It's what's called the plexiglass car in Daytona speak, which means it's as it was introduced, it's as it was brought out. It's got the 4 headlights, 2 main beam, 2 dip beam, and it's got this piece of perspex with these beautifully designed in lines that go across the front. And this was how they originally intended it to be built, the Daytona. And they made 1,200 or so Daytonas in total. I think about 400 of them were the plexiglass front. And then what happened is the American regulations came along. They demanded that there was nothing covering the headlamps, and also that the headlamps had to be of a certain height. So the later Daytonas with the pop-up headlights, the other Daytona we've got here has actually got those, so we can see what they look like if not working. They were between 1 inch and 2 inches higher than these in height on the car, and also not covered. And That's how all Daytonas from around about early 1971 had that fixture on them, the pop-up headlights. But just to go back to the general thing about this car, it's the fourth plexiglass right-hand drive car built. So it's a very, very early car. And there are differences. There are a Series 1 and Series 2 plexiglass Daytona. So the Series 1s, which this car is, had a slightly different gear ratio in the differential. And it also had aluminium skins instead of steel on the doors. So they left the factory, I know not why, because the rest of the car is steel, but they left the factory with alloy door skins. And in fact, this car has still got its alloy door skins, or has got a set of alloy door skins. Whether they've been replaced or not, I don't know. So it's a very true to original vision Daytona, this, actually. It was styled by Leonardo Fioravanti, who worked for Pininfarina, and it's quite a radical piece of design. There's genius in this design. I mean, it's an amazing looking car. They still have presence 50 odd years on in spadefuls. But the windscreen, for example, I just did, for mischief, did a little measuring. And the windscreen, the center point of the top and bottom of the windscreen is actually the center point of the car. That's how much front end there is in front of, the passengers and their luggage and the fuel and the gearbox and all that good stuff is actually in the back half of the car, and the front half of the car is just the business end of things, the engine, etc. And one of the parts of Leonardo Fioravanti's genius with this car is that it has no aerodynamic spoilers on it whatsoever. Nothing. It has no front air dam. It has the front just cleaves the wind like that, top and bottom, but it still manages to have downforce because of the way it's designed. Same at the back end. No rear lip spoiler, nothing underneath the car like the later Ferrari 456s, nothing like that, no aerodynamic aids. But this car did 174 miles an hour as authenticated by lots of road testers. It wasn't just an ethereal number, it was actually proved. Out of the box, this car did 174 miles an hour. That made it, at the time, the fastest production car in the world. And the Lamborghini Miura, various road testers did test Miuras to a top speed, and we're talking around about 171, 172 miles an hour. The other thing is this did 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds, and that was blisteringly fast for a proper GT car in the late 60s. There was nothing really in terms of production cars could compete with that top speed and acceleration ratio. I would venture to say you don't realize the genius behind the aerodynamic simplicity of this car until you look at, for example, German cars of the 1970s, very few of which could manage to reach 174 miles an hour, and almost all of them had aerodynamic aids of some sort on them. Even the lowly Audi TT ended up having a rear spoiler. I say lowly, it's whatever it is, 140, 150 mile an hour car, but there's a big difference between 150 miles an hour and 174. So this is the work of genius, this car. It really is. They came as standard with mag alloy wheels. It was the last Ferrari model that you could have spoked wheels on, ever. And the reason why they went on to the mag alloy wheels, and the reason why the Barani spoked wheels, they would fit them for you, but only with a bit of a frown. And the reason for that is because this is a heavy car. It's 1.5 tons, which was a heavy car for the 1960s. And it's also very powerful and very fast. And the wire wheels weren't up to the job. They were starting to be at the limit of what they could cope with in terms of torque, weight, transfer of weight round corners, braking, etc. Just the G-forces involved and the weight. And that's why the mag alloy wheel came to stay. the weight and performance of this car rendered the wire wheel obsolete at a stroke. A very interesting piece of machinery. I love Daytonas. They made 158 right-hand drive Daytonas. I don't know how many of them I've worked on in the last 40 years. 15, 20%, something like that of total right-hand drive production over the years. But this is a delight to have this car in. It really is. It's such a very honest car with a fascinating history. The first owner was a British member of aristocracy. Alain de Cadenet collected this car from Maranello for his friend, and I'm sure had a wonderful time driving it across the continent and back to the UK. I had the pleasure of meeting him on a few occasions before he sadly passed away. What an amazing man and what an amazing life. To add further to the car's history, it was owned by Daley Thompson in the mid to late 80s, the British multi-gold medalist, Olympic gold medalist, and personality and raconteur in his own right. So it's had a colourful history in a good way, this car. So we're going to just have a look at some of the things that we'll be looking out for underneath the car, some of the design elements, some of the make or break things in terms of roadworthiness, etc. And then we'll be taking the car, if it passes muster on that, we'll take it out for a run. Well, as ever, I refer to my trusty motor show reviews of the time because they are so interesting. This is the Daily Express motor show review from 1969, and we look at this one has got the Ferrari Daytona in it, and the princely sum, including purchase tax of £8,750 would buy you a Daytona in 1969, just after they were launched. And to put that into perspective, a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow long wheelbase, which is one of the most expensive cars in the world, was £7,960 against eight. So it was about 15% cheaper than a Daytona to buy a Rolls-Royce. And the Maserati Ghibli, which had a live rear axle. It wasn't nearly a high-tech rear suspension as the Daytona. Still a great car and almost as fast as the Daytona, but 10,179. And if we look at just finally E-Type Jaguars, and we know they were always good value, E-Type Jaguars, £2,642 would buy you an E-Type, as against 8,750. You could have 3 E-Type Jaguars for the price of a Ferrari Daytona new. Incredible. Well, one of the other contributing factors to this car's incredible aerodynamics that allowed it to eke 174 miles an hour out of 352 brake horsepower was the rake of the windscreen. This windscreen is angled at 65 degrees. And there were only 2 other cars at the time, to my knowledge, that had that rake of windscreen. One was the Ferrari Dino, and the other one was the Lamborghini Miura. They were both actually also 65 degrees, but this teardrop shape over the top of the car is a large part of its aerodynamics. And these exquisitely double curved quarter windows at the back, the air just flows over here beautifully. Hence the fact that there is no kick-up rear spoiler required. And this needed a double curved piece of glass, which was very, very expensive to make, actually very expensive. The other car that I can bring to mind with double curved glass, and it was the Lamborghini 350 GT and 400 GT, and the Citroën SM rear window. These were also made of double curved glass, and it was fearsomely expensive in the 1960s and 70s to make, but the Daytona would not be the same without this. Just exquisite detailing. Well, another part of original equipment on the Daytona, and another reason perhaps for its very high price, is this amazing toolkit that they came with as standard. That's heavy, that's about 8 or 9 kilograms, I reckon. And it's a beautiful piece of kit. In fact, it's so beautiful. Some light-fingered dealers in the past have actually relieved Daytonas of their toolkits and sold them separately, and they're now worth up to £15,000 on their own. That's why they did it, obviously. Nice little sideline if you can get it. But fortunately, this car has still got its original toolkit, and that is lovely. Well, another interesting attention to detail thing on the Daytona. It doesn't affect its buying appraisal, but just a bit of a nerdy fact. Couldn't get away with doing a video without it. The camshaft, this is a camshaft with the nose of the cam next to the timing chain here, running across the engine. The Daytona has 4 of them. And the back, for ultimate power at 7,700 revs, you actually have these lobes at the back here machined 4 degrees ahead of these here. So that what happens is, as the camshaft rotates at high RPM, these actually, because of the wind-up of the material, these actually compensate. As the camshaft twists under load, you still have the correct valve timing, even on the back valves. It's only 4 degrees, but this shows how clever the Ferrari machinists and draftsmen were. Well, this is where the technology, the passion, the money is on a Daytona. It's the nuts and bolts and the greasy bits underneath the car. For all its outward beauty, this is where it's really at, and this is where the money went, a lot of it. We've got the exhaust systems, these amazing twin exhausts, 1 per bank of 6 cylinders that come down the car. And interestingly, this car still has a mild steel system up to here, and then a stainless steel system from the center boxes back. I wonder if that's why this car sounds so very good. I suspect it is, because stainless steel exhaust, mild steel exhaust systems tend to sound better than stainless steel exhaust systems. Anyway, you can see that the exhaust travels down the outside of each side, and there are pipes at the front called supernumerary pipes. And these are extremely clever bits of kit. There's 4 of them on the car, 1 for each bank of 3, 1 for each group of 3 cylinders, and they exit the exhaust system and then come back in again. And I've spoken to various acoustical exhaust engineers, very clever people over the years, because I've always been intrigued by these ever since I discovered them 40 years ago. And nobody can give me a straight answer to a straight question. What do they actually do? But having said that, we trust that the engineers at Ferrari, and particularly ANSA, who made these exhaust systems for Ferrari, knew what they were doing. So if somebody can tell me what the supernumerary pipes do, I would be delighted. So we've got here the heart of the Daytona, that beautiful engine up front. The dry sump lubrication system means that the vast majority of the engine oil is kept in a tank behind the left-hand front wheel, quite a big cube-shaped tank. And the total capacity of the engine oil alone on these cars is about 13-14 litres, a lot of oil. But one of the advantages of that is that the engine can be mounted lower in the frame of the car, because it hasn't got as much space underneath to hold all the oil. And that means that the centre of gravity of the car can be lower, and it's got that lovely low bonnet line, that low hood line with no power bulge or anything like that. It's just not needed. The car looks dramatic enough and wonderful enough as it is. But that's the reason why they could do that. We've got the dry sump lubrication, the exhaust system. This here is the transmission, the gearbox. Then moving on to the actual powertrain itself, the drive line. You've got independent suspension on all 4 wheels, and this was not necessarily something to be taken for granted. The Maserati Ghibli, which as we saw earlier was more expensive even than the Daytona, had a live rear axle, very, very low tech, which could bounce around all over the place according to the bumps in the road and whatever else. This is a far more elegant independent suspension system. So 99% of the time, whatever is happening with this wheel does not affect what's happening with that wheel. And in the middle, you've got this very large gearbox here, a very substantial bit of kit. It's got its own oil pump. It's one of the few car gearboxes, manual gearboxes, that's actually got an oil pump filling the bearings and gears. So this is directly and rigidly fixed to the engine at the front via the bell housing and clutch. So it's one assembly, front to rear. It's called a torque tube assembly. It was brought in by Ferrari in the 275 GTB, the model just before this. On the later versions of that, and there are various advantages again to this system. One of them is that you need two main mountings on the engine and two main mountings on the transmission, and because nothing is moving about, because it's such a big assembly, and it's fairly mounted at fairly wide distance from each other, the mountings, you don't have to have super rigid mountings to make it work. You don't have tremendous torque trying to do this with the nose of the differential here. The torque is transmitted all the way through to the engine and vice versa. And in fact, it's such an elegant solution that Porsche ended up using it on the 924 and the 928 as just one example in the 1970s. And it worked with great effect. It keeps the weight of the gearbox over the back wheels, which increases traction. There are various, but you've still got the beauty of the front engine rear-wheel drive layout. Various elegant engineering solutions at work here. With a view to appraising this car, we're just going to look at a couple of things, particularly under here. The rubber suspension bushes, which go in the wishbones where they join onto the chassis, have a habit of rotting and actually cracking the rubber around those. And these are in pretty good condition. They're in very serviceable condition. It's easy to see that this car is not in concours condition underneath, but we're going to have a word with the owner and see what exactly he wants. I mean, this is actually a very presentable and very facilitable car, if I can use such an expression. It's very fit for purpose if we can tidy up a lot of this and give it a good service, free the brakes off, overhaul the calipers, put new flexi hoses on, etc. Give the car a check over. Marcus has tightened the sump while he's been doing the leak down test, because it was just weeping a bit of oil from there. We've cleaned all that off so we can see what it's like after a road test. But the appraisal is just checking things over. We're looking at the highly technical side of things. Is all the infrastructure in good condition and very serviceable and not showing signs of undue age, such as the suspension bushes I'm talking about. But is it serviceable? Is it fit for purpose from a visual and beauty point of view? Well, that's up to the owner to decide. Of course we can go mad and do a concours restoration, but I suspect this car is probably usable and honest enough. A bit like the Aston Martin DB6 that I did the last video on. Is it going to pass muster without all that attention, cosmetic attention to detail done to it? So we'll take it on down the road now, and we'll give it a run and see how everything comes together. Well, having said that, let's take it for a run. Don't know what that means. Never was very good at English. Right, we'll take it on the road and give it a run. I've just spent a good while warming the engine and the transaxle through. The problem is the gearbox, because it's at the back of the car, actually only relies on heat percolated from the engine to warm up, as opposed to being next to the engine. So anyway, it's good to be in the saddle of a Daytona again. I absolutely love these cars. They're one of my favourites. They always have been. Ever since I saw a photograph in one of those motor show reviews, I thought that is a stunning looking car, and it's got the credentials to back up the looks, so what's not to like? And the funny thing is, so many Daytonas, there are certain makes and model of car that they drive really badly. I know I talk about this a lot in my videos, and people just say, oh, they all do that, that's how they are. And the Daytona, I find, is one of the cars that actually that applies to more than any other. You know, I've driven, we've had a lot of Daytonas in over the years that have been really quite horrible to drive, and the owners haven't complained about the fact that they're so bad or anything like that. They've just not known any better, any different. And I've said to them, you do realise this car is driving terribly? And they said, no, I thought that was what they were all like. No, it's not what they're all like. And this actually feels, yeah, I can tell that the dampers are a bit tight. When I mentioned earlier on about one of the things that can stick on classic Ferraris in general is the Koni shock absorbers. Nothing against the shock absorbers whatsoever, it's just lack of use. Yeah, I think as we drive this car, and this is literally the first time I've driven this car, Marcus has done the inspection. I'm just gently coaxing it into life. We've got the T's and P's, oil pressure's good, the water temp is right in the middle of the gauge, and the oil temperature is coming up nicely too. Yeah, I can sense a little bit of play in the steering, which is not uncommon with a steering box setup such as this has got. And of course, the heart of this car, apart from that stunning Leonardo Fioravanti styling and all the engineering, the heart, as ever with any Ferrari, is the engine. And I love the throttle response in these cars. It's just, it's absolutely instantaneous. Because you're opening 12 butterflies with a slight touch of the accelerator, it just has that lovely throttle response. There it is. What is not to like about that delicious noise? And I can tell this car hasn't been opened up for quite some time, because there's a bit of smoke coming out the back, a bit of carbon build-up on acceleration, and that's just because the car's been started, moved around, probably not on 12 cylinders. We had to coax it onto 12 cylinders because it had been started and moved, which is nothing unusual. And one of my very first videos, I show how I coax spark plugs into working again that actually haven't been working. And I think it's Lamborghini and Ferrari Daytona, if you want to check out that video. But for all its lack of activity, this car is actually responding very nicely. Not happy about the play in the steering. We'll have to do something about that. But the steering on the Daytonas is one of the things where they are supposedly truck-like, as some unkind journalists have said, is the steering. And the reason for that, there's about, I don't know, 13, 14 joints on the, or pivots on the steering on this car, and it only needs one or two of those to be tight or a bit sticky, and the whole steering, it just throws the whole thing out. It's non-power assisted, which is a shame actually, because I think it would have made a difference to the Daytona, although you certainly have plenty of feel, and you certainly know you're driving something serious with it the way it is. Yeah, it doesn't take much, and people again say that, oh well, I thought that was normal, I thought that was what they were like. No, it's not what they're like. Yes, they're never going to be light with a big V12 under the bonnet and no power assistance, but they're not that bad. If they weren't livable with, Ferrari wouldn't have made it. Although expectations are different these days, of course. But yeah, the suspension's just beginning to yield a little now and free up a bit. I'm just sympathetically bringing this car back to life. No histrionics, just gradually letting it warm through. Let's see how we get on. And when they are running beautifully, they're very tractable. They're a very, they were a genuine Gran Turismo car, even though the engine develops 80 brake horsepower a litre, which was pretty robust for the late 60s and early 70s. Ferrari knew what they were doing, and I'm just going to actually lower this down to about, this is the test of a properly tuned Daytona. There it goes, no hesitation, from 1500 RPM, pulls cleanly. That's the sign of a properly sorted Daytona. And just to get nerdy for a moment, the camshaft timing, the valve timing on the inlets and exhausts, which alters the characteristics of the engine very much. Ferrari hit on a formula with this and the Dino 246, 206, which became the 246, and the valve timing is exactly the same. It's the same duration, same opening, same closing, because it works. So that's why this engine, the 308 and the 246, all have the same running characteristics, which is they pull from below 1500 RPM, but they're redlined at 7,700 RPM, and the power curve is linear. It's not like a turbocharged car where it comes in and suddenly you're off. Because it's so tractable, it pulls from low revs, and it is just a gradual surge of power. I'm just going to prove that when we get on the straight, because it is well and truly warmed up nicely now. Very happy. So let's drop it down. There it is. Lovely, smooth. You can actually hear it. It's just smooth all the way. It's a linear power curve. And again, just that amazing throttle response. The sheer power pulls the front of the car up. It lifts it up. That is raw power. It's not because the suspension's soft. It's because of the sheer grunt, the twisting power of the engine, lifting the weight of the car at the front up as a reaction to the torque going through the back wheels. It's intoxicating. You don't get that with so many super engineered modern cars. They just don't have that fluidity. Amazing. Yeah, and now that the dampers are warming up a bit, we'll just give it a little bit of some work to do on this bend. Oh, beautiful. Lovely. This is why this car was built for continent crushing. There wasn't much around at this time that could cover the ground as efficiently and as excitingly as this. And I'm sure Alain de Cadenet had a wonderful time driving what was then Ferrari's latest and greatest back from Maranello to the UK for its first owner. It's a tough job, but somebody had to do it. The pedals are perfectly placed for heeling and towing, so you can just accelerate. When you come to the bend, toe on the brake, heel on the accelerator, and then power out of the bend. just fabulous. This is still a fast car. As I mentioned earlier, it was the fastest production car in the world in 1968, 69 when it first came out. 174 mile an hour, out of the box, 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds. They were respectable figures 15, 20 years ago, never mind 50 odd years ago. That lovely induction roar, now she's on 12. How long would you like this video to be? I'm happy to be here for the next 3 hours. Yes, there is work to do on this car. Just feel that torque, it's incredible. I've often compared the Daytona and the 550 Maranello, or the 575, to each other because Luca di Montezemolo decided to get rid of the mid-engine Ferrari supercar concept with the end of the Testarossa line and go back to front-engine rear-wheel drive. He wanted a usable supercar, which is why he came up with the 550 series, front-engine rear-wheel drive, same as this. And you can see why. It's a delight to drive a front-engine rear-wheel drive car. They're just so beautifully balanced. It's an optimal solution to a car's weight distribution and layout. We'll just have to open its lungs up for a moment again. As my mother would say, wrap it. I'll take it. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop video. Please subscribe, please like, it does help, and we'll be back with something else very soon.